So, do you think that in Trinidad and Tobago we have a true sense of what our identity is? What would you tell that young person who has an idea, has no resources, don't know where to go, doesn't have a mentor? What are the immediate steps that that person should take?
So if my life were to end and I were able to say that I strengthened the bridge between Africa and the Caribbean, in particular West Africa and the Caribbean, I would say my life was purposeful. During enslavement, we, through our toil as Africans, developed Europe. We are responsible for the Industrial Revolution. It is in our ingenuity and our toil for no remuneration that Europe experienced an Industrial Revolution.
Welcome to The Blueprint with Dr. Jelani Isaac Reed. I am your host, Dr. Jelani Reed, medical doctor by profession, activist by passion, and a lifelong student of learning, transformation, and innovation. On the Blueprint podcast, guest, one in Mr. Taharqa Obika, an individual who is in economics, who is in politics, who is diverse in culture, and who also served as our envoy to Ghana and Africa. So, listeners of the Blueprint podcast, welcome. Welcome, Taharqa.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
So,
I guess you could say I was kind of like an envoy, but more as a consultant for the trade mission that we had last year.
yes,
But actually, my father was the High Commissioner.
indeed.
So it was a pleasure to be here, Dr. Reed, Jelani. I mean it's good that you are pushing a narrative, which is excellence, and a narrative of excellence is always important. As we were having the conversation earlier about recognizing when is your era, when is your time. A lot of persons suffer imposter syndrome in their 20s and 30s, but as you march well into your 30s, and now I'm early 40s, I'm 41, you don't have the time or the luxury to worry about imposter syndrome. You have to share, and what reminds you very much of that is when you go and speak to students in secondary school, and you mention your age. I can remember I was 35 as a senator, and I said my age. And I say I'm 35, and you see some children like, oh, you old boy. And they were 15, 16. And 15, 16, 17. And I say, well, so you all will be more than twice your age to the parliamentarians. Here, I'm a child, because they had senior parliamentarians present, Speaker of the House and so on. And I said that to give them perspective, but it also reinforced in me the importance of recognizing this is our time to not just to grow, but to share, because we have already reached a certain level of professional development, personal development, financial development, if you may, and it's important to share. And in sharing, we grow. Iron sharpen iron, as you say.
Well said. So, Taharqa, your name carries a lot of cultural and historical weight. What does it mean, and why did you get that name?
So my father, he was born with an English name, and he decided, although actually really not really English, his last name was the capital of France, Paris, and he recognized he was a student of history. He went to the University of the West Indies in the early 70s, and he recognized the importance of healing, as Bob Marley said, removing the shackles of mental slavery. So he changed his name as part of a process that many persons went through in the 1970s in Trinidad and Tobago, that we refer to now as the Black Power era, that they refer to as the revolution of the masses of Trinidad and Tobago. Importantly, he changed his name to, he chose a Nigerian Igbo name, last name, and he chose a Nile Valley Egyptian first name.
All right.
So I have a Nile Valley Egyptian first name, Taharqa, which is 6th century BC, the 25th dynasty of Upper Egyptian kings. So he was from northern Sudan, southern Egypt, that part of the Nile, and that was 6th century BC. So it's 2,600 years ago. He was a warrior king, in that he reclaimed several times Lower Egypt, which is modern day Egypt under Nubian rule from the Assyrians, who were Arabs effectively, if you want to use that, or Persians. So Taharqa was a Nubian warrior king that defended Nubia. I mean, I guess I take some of that personality in me. Maybe my father, even as a parent, you get certain inspirations when you name a child. So maybe, or maybe it's because I'm a middle child that was necessary. But so Taharqa is Upper Egypt, and Obika means the family is supreme, and it's a Nigerian Igbo name. In an Igbo family, the Obi is a family installation in the home of the head of the family.
Right.
And so therefore, the supremacy of the family as a unit is what that name celebrates.
Right. So, Taharqa, it is clear that your family background is rooted in culture. It's rooted in activism. And, your family as well would have participated strongly in the NJAC movement. How did that experience growing up inform the person that you are today?
It defined me. It gives me a continued sense of purpose. And it's like a conversation I was having with my daughter. My daughter asked me, "What is purpose?" And I say, "It's like your teacher, they give their life." I say, "We all go back to the dirt when we finish here, but your teacher give their life to educating you and your friends. So when they finish and they leave this earth, they would have fulfilled their purpose." So she said, "Well, what is your purpose?" I said, "Well, I'm living it," And I believe we have no one is a single story. So we have different things that we do with our life. But when you look in the obituaries in the Express classified newspapers, you just see one line. You don't see a paragraph, right? You don't see a big chapter and verse and so on. So you get one line. He was a teacher, is that. He was a footballer, is that. So if my life were to end and I was able to say that I strengthened the bridge between Africa and the Caribbean, in particular West Africa and the Caribbean, I would say my life was purposeful. And one of the things that my father would have spent most of his time, he's 70 years now, doing is internationalizing Emancipation Day. And Antigua celebrated as by virtue of his activism there. Then you had Barbados. He went to Boston, New York, Washington, Toronto, London, and then so you got different cities and boroughs to celebrate the day and to have it as an official day. And then he went to Ghana. President Jerry John Rawlings was the president of Ghana at the time, and they inculcated August 1st as emancipation, which is important because they would not have experienced enslavement. We left there, but there was no enslavement there. There was colonial domination, subjugation, and war and bloodshed. But there were no plantations in the form that we experience it here in the Caribbean. So them taking up that day, which is more for the diaspora than for the continent, was significant. And that was a bridge. Currently, I serve on the Reparations Committee, which I'm thankful to our now former Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, for placing me there when I joined the People's National Movement in June 2023. June 15th, I believe, was the day I left where I was, and I had the good sense to join the People's National Movement. So I served on the Reparations Committee since September of that year to date. And one of the things I'm proud of being on the committee is having penned a proposal and a framework for a national reparations fund. So in the Accra Reparations Conference in November 2023, between the African Union and CARICOM, it was decided and there was a resolution passed to form a global reparations fund to accept the proceeds from the former colonial powers. I shouldn't say former because they still have colonies in the Caribbean. St. Martin is Dutch, Guadeloupe is French, British Virgin Islands is British, and so on. So the colonial powers that engaged in the transatlantic slave trade, when they pay reparations, to have it enter a fund with certain rules and certain rules for spending. And what I proposed when I returned to Trinidad was the establishment of a national fund. And we prepared that proposal. The committee made some changes, and then we sent that to the CARICOM level. And then I subsequently went to Barbados to encourage colleagues there from their reparations committee to establish a similar fund. Jamaica, at the same time, not through our doing, decided that they will also set up a fund. Because what happened is, and this is last year, Grenada started getting commitments for payment from a former landholding and slaveholding family from England. I think it was 200,000 pounds. I'm not sure what's the figure. But that meant it is actually live. It is happening. It has happened already, that reparations are being paid. So if you have a fund, then it sets up rules for paying monies into the fund, accepting payments, and then payments out of the fund. What projects will benefit from such a reparations fund? Because the aim is, during enslavement, we, through our toil as Africans, developed Europe. We are responsible for the Industrial Revolution. It is in our ingenuity and our toil at for no remuneration, all right, that Europe experienced an Industrial Revolution. Therefore, a significant part of this repayment should go towards building our capacity. So part of righting the wrongs is building our capacity. So I'm proud of having been able to do that. We have not yet reached the point where we can set up the fund, but of course, everything is a process. And the second thing that I'm championing at this point is Transatlantic shipping line. In fact, this morning I had a conversation with the head of Afro-Exim Bank in the Caribbean, indicating that whilst we in the Caribbean focus a lot on the direct flight, most trade occurs on the sea. And as a result of that, we should be focusing on the maritime connection at the same time. And therefore, Afro-Exim Bank has $3 billion US to lend to the Caribbean region for projects of a significant size. And therefore, this is that promote trade and economic development. One can't argue against a maritime fleet. And it will be in the vein of the work of Marcus Garvey, who had the Black Star Line, and Kwame Nkrumah, who developed a similar Black Star Line in Ghana. But then, of course, with the ousting of Kwame Nkrumah, most of the good things that he did suffered. And that was one. So we can bring back, this is nothing new, but we are in a better and stronger position now to trade with each other. Our economies were then aligned to Europe. Now our economies are aligned to self-sustainability, and we can trade with each other. So those are two things that I'm championing. So getting back to the point of culture, I think being born in NJAC has given me a purpose, and it connects me to the work of my father.
What is the most important lesson you learned from your father?
From my father? My father stands out as someone, a man of integrity, a man persons who interact with him have respect for him, whether they agree with him or not. They respect him. I remember growing up, NJAC had a newspaper called The Liberation, and we would walk house to house selling it, Laventille and Sando and Marble and Point, and people would disagree with certain positions, and Jack would detail its positions on the liberation paper, on issues of national and global significance. And he would end up in heated arguments with people, which would look like that to me, all right? But at the end of it, persons would still leave with a sense of respect for him because he held a position firmly. And that is one thing that I believe has remained with me. I do everything with conviction. So even in my politics, I'm a conviction politician. If I can't put my heart, body, and soul, and a test that I use is if I can't carry my child to that place that you have because of the characters that are there, then that is not a place for me, you know? So in terms of politics and national development. So I am a conviction politician. I'm a conviction contributor, you know? So, and my father, he led everything that he did with a strong sense of belief in what he was doing.
Yeah, I can see that. And I can see as well that that is the story and that is the point that you would want to leave for your children and those that interact with you. I appreciate that.
Definitely.
Now, your family and your background comes from a strong sense of culture, right? Through the National Joint Action Committee, NJACT, and playing its part in the political sphere of Trinidad and Tobago, and would have used different mechanisms, calypso competition, selling papers and to educate and inform the population, and taking civic action whenever that time arises.
And it's also the role of the African. Because remember, when NJAC was formed, the majority of its membership were of African descent. And in the challenge at that time was even just recognizing that you're African.
Correct.
I remember that conversation with a taxi driver, elderly man, I said, we as Africans, the man nearly crashed the car. He said, I ain't no African with you. I'm a Creole. And I said, yes, uncle, yes, uncle. You understand? So it shows that we've come a long way, because I remember that conversation with some young people. I was a senator at the time in Point Fortin. We call it Point Fortin College. It was Point Fortin East Secondary, as he named the school as. And most of the children were black, you know, and I asked them to a history class. I talk on emancipation and I asked them, how much of you all are African? Everybody raised their hand. Everybody was black, raised their hand. And I said, okay, well, half of my parents' work is done. Because that's what what we're trying to do.
Correct. Yeah, first objective.
So I had to change my entire speech because I was coming there to tell them about the greatness of Africa. I was like, no, we see Wakanda already. We know about this and that. We understand. We watch movies in Nigerian movies. We see African clothes. So they understand, and some of them could even tell you the nuances and the hidden messages that are not necessarily for African people in Wakanda, all right? Because remember that tries to pit the African in the diaspora against the African on the continent. There are hidden messages here with Killmonger versus T'Challa and so on. But they could tell you that. That is 11, that is 13, 14, 15-year-olds. So they are so conscious because of the same social media that we find is dangerous, that because they mightn't spend 100% of the time watching that, they might spend 5%, but that's enough for them to develop an understanding. The other 95% is doing things that children do if you give them a device.
Right.
So the role at the time was also to get African people to understand a sense of consciousness. Okay. And I think on that score they've succeeded. They also tried to build institutions of a country. On that score they succeeded. And the joke is that NJAC was not really a political party. In fact, there was a belief conventional politics, not or revolution. So it's either you were in one camp or the other.
Right.
And they were for revolution. And therefore, even though you may see someone in NJAC talking politics, that person who had that level of education, they don't see themselves as a politician. when the first state of emergency was held in 1970 and Makandal Daga and the leadership were detained. I think they were Nelson Island or wherever they were. And he was one of the powerful young speakers that took over the streets of Port of Spain, around the country in Tobago, before he went to study. So the reality is NJAC was never formed, and actually can't deny its roots. It was never formed to be a political party. It was formed to have Tobago have the institutions of a nation, and also to address the issues with respect to the base of its organization, which is African people, to have a sense of self, a sense of destiny, a sense of direction. Caribbean people to have a sense of self, destiny, and therefore the issues in the Caribbean that required unification were necessary. Even within Tobago, unification amongst the races, religious tolerance as well. So all those issues were part of NJAC's focus. The focus of NJAC wasn't really on governance. It was on building the institutions of a country, giving people a sense of consciousness, despite the colonial inheritance. Because remember, even at the time, we were still under the Queen.
Yes.
When NJAC was in its heyday, we were under the Queen. It was only in 1976, long after anybody else, nobody was detained in NJAC after 1974. So NJAC was no longer really active as a revolutionary force in the way that it was in 1970, by 1976. So that said, I think my purpose is being in governance with the party, with the People's National Movement, is to contribute to the development of Tobago. And I think I'm getting a chance to do that by being on the Reparations Committee, doing work in entrepreneurship development, and I hope to continue to do so.
So you have worked, studied, you have business on the continent of Africa, and you would have seen firsthand how our brothers and sisters in Africa marry together culture and economic growth and development. What were the lessons you have learned from that experience, and how can we bring it back home in Trinidad?
Culture and economic growth and development. Yes. Although Tobago does culture and economic growth very well, it's just we don't look at it because we only look at oil and gas and manufacturing. But we do culture development well. We export Carnival to different countries. In Africa, they would want to develop the African way. Remember when I went to Ghana, a big sign that spoke to family values. So it is not enough to develop if you don't maintain the family values. It is not enough to develop if you lose your language in the process. And therefore, they want to develop, but on their own terms. And the other thing that struck me very strong is the richness of the culture is still there. So when you talk about civilizations, we talk about the Greeks, but the Greeks learned from the Egyptians who are black, right? So the Greeks learned from Africans everything they know. And therefore, it is the same Africans that civilized Europe. Civilization is when we record ancient civilization, the Greek civilization, we don't talk about the buildings that they built. We talk about the artistry around the buildings. We talk about the music. We talk about the paintings. When we talk about African civilizations, we talk about the bronze statues in Benin Kingdom in Nigeria. We talk about the architecture in Timbuktu and so on. And the music and culture and cultural traditions of even Kente in Ghana. We don't talk about the buildings only as a sense of function that they could build a building. We look at the quality, the things that add to quality of life. And all the things that add to quality of life of the African centuries ago are still very much there. So the ingredients of civilization are there. What is needed is the advancements made in terms of global development economically need to be reflected in Africa. And the challenges in a world where there is one pole, which is the North, whether you're looking to Russia or to America, you don't get a chance to develop. All right, because there are military struggles you'll have to overcome, which poses its own challenges. But in a multipolar world, Africans are thriving. So we are in a multipolar world now. China is a player. India is holding their own. And then Africa as a group are now making bold statements that 50 years ago would have been a cause for a coup. Because, of course, the colonial powers would not have allowed it.
Correct. So, do you think that in Trinidad and Tobago we have a true sense of what our identity is?
Yes. And how we know that is when a man sings a song and says, "I know Kaiso, I know Soca," what we are doing there is telling them that is not Trinbagonian. You know? If somebody is talking, where by the accent from, boy? You know? Because we understand what we put into this world as Trinbagonians. We understand exactly what we put into this world as Trinbagonians. And it is our culture. And it is our culture that defines our space. And even though we are only 1.3 million people, we have a presence in the world that goes beyond that when it comes to culture.
Do you see the education system playing a role in the preservation of culture?
Yeah, I see it more so now, more than when I was going to school. Because now, almost every school has access to culture.
Yes.
In my time, you could have accessed playing a steelpan, but it depended on the abilities and the determination of your school. But now the national program is broader. Because I'm talking about 90s. You know, so 20 years, 25 years after, the country has embraced fully our culture much more than ever. Because even when I was growing up, still, if you want to be involved in culture, it means you wanted to be poor.
Yeah.
I guess in my parents' time, it meant you wanted to go to jail, right? But in my time, it meant you wanted to be poor. So, or you had the risk of being poor. Now, if a child says they want to study music and go to UTT, parents would not really object. And therefore, it's because we understand that there is an economy behind culture. In fact, one of the things that is dear to me, when I was a senator, was asking about forming a creative industry policy. So when I was at the Ministry of Trade, we had conversations, but I was only there for a short time. And it's something that's where I am now, we're trying to see if we can revive, which is a creative industry policy. So we have a industry development policy. That is our national trade policy. But we don't have we have a cultural policy as well. But that is about cultural protection and so on, and development. But what we need is a policy that speaks strictly to the creative industry and developing that. So you take the aspects of culture that can generate revenue, that could be exploited for talent and generation of revenue, and we focus on those things, and we build institutional pillars around those things. For example, we make steel pans, but the industry is artisanal, right? And seasonal in terms of making pans. Although we have CVQ qualifications, persons making steel pans in school, but now you have Panland on the Eastern Maryland Laventil, you have Mitco, and you have other persons accessing the grants that the Ministry of Trade has for manufacturing steel pan, and that they're improving their output. And what that means is, once we get back a chroming factory, because Mustafa Chrome burnt down, we have two other persons doing chroming, but there's a question of what the panmen prefer in terms of the quality. And so once we build more pillars around that industry, we cover pan. But then now you go to Carnival. costume making. It's a drain on foreign exchange. Why? We have different reasons for that. The kiddies carnival, the people make a lot of the costumes, but they still import some of the items. It may mean that the beads and those things, we may need to bring those who are in the traditional manufacturing sector to manufacture those things so that they can supply, so therefore you don't have to go to China and Thailand and so on, can supply the inputs into costume making from here. And then you could export to the world. So that's what I mean by pillars of the creative industry. And then, of course, you're into where you have an intensive setup here with cameras and so on. Why or can we then look at even the things that support
such an industry,
videography and so on, manufacturing some part of it here? It may not be that we can make all things, but we could probably make one or two brands. And what that requires now is getting our entrepreneurial minds so focused. So instead of seeking to import everything, how can we manufacture some aspect? I think we could make lights here, maybe, I don't know. Maybe we can make the casing for the lights. And maybe we can get our foot in the market with that, and then we grow from there. Maybe we can manufacture green screens, who knows? So if we start to build pillars around the creative industry, manufacturing things that support the industry here, we already have the creative talent. I mean, if people go to a panyard and they practice 4 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's 20 hours, and then they do that for about 10 weeks, that's 200 hours by 100 people. That's 20,000 hours. If we could do that, we know we have enough talented musicians, cultural workers already. What we need now is the traditional manufacturing sector to get involved to support them. Yeah.
So, Taharqa, we started in terms of your background.
Mm-hmm.
We spoke about culture. And interestingly, our next segment is to talk about the economic climate that we're in as a world. You know, a couple of years back, globalization was the talk of the town, where we are basically removing borders and trying our best to operate as one world, one nation. And we now live in a climate where we are now thinking of having a nationalist point of view in terms of defense, in terms of trade. Tariffs is the big word now. And we are also looking at a continent that was not considered in the past is now considered the place where everyone should be or should go to in terms of development. What are the biggest opportunities as well as risks do we have for Trinidad and Tobago in this global context?
The opportunities, too many to mention, but I'll start with one. Today I had a conversation, as we had our Exim Bank, but this afternoon I had a conversation with a film producer and a production company. So they're bringing a film to Trinidad. It's funded by Nigerian capital out of England and Lagos, Nigeria. And the producer, he's from Nigeria. So they're coming here and they're using here as a location to film. But the film will be targeted Netflix as usual, and then of course the Nigerian market, because they do launches at their cinemas and so on. And that opportunity is real, because if you're a manufacturer of any product and it's selling in Africa, you can get product placement. If you are interested in being an actor or being involved in something behind the camera, you can get into the industry that produces the most amount of films on the planet, Nollywood, right? Which is Nigerian film industry. And then you have other companies that are from Nigeria that want to come to the Caribbean or Africa that can come. So that's one simple tool. And in fact, I might even introduce him to you so he could come on your podcast. You know, when they come.
That, yes.
And there's actors that you will know once you see them. Right. In Kemowo, which is a popular comedic actor from Nigeria, senior guy, and they have some other person. So it's not a third-rate cast. It's A-listers from a Nollywood context.
Yes.
And what that means is we stand right now in a way where we can benefit directly from being given the opportunity to do business without prejudice. So the experience going to the North Atlantic is you have to prove yourself. You spend more time proving yourself than executing on a project. And even when you get through the door, it's more shades of gray than black and white in terms of how you stand to benefit. But when you may find out down the road that somebody else truly owns what you think you own and that kind of nonsense. But when you go to Africa, you are dealing, and then when you go to Europe, North Atlantic, you may not get to be in the blockbuster. You may not get to be in the center of things. Yes. But if you go to Africa, you will be at the top. There will be no barrier to you entering in the way that you may experience it in the North Atlantic. And you find that you are treated as if you are already a belonger. That's a phrase I use in the Virgin Islands. You are treated as a belonger, not an alien. But when you go to the North Atlantic, you are clear that you don't belong. You can be in the room. You will be reminded that
Yes.
we're giving you a blind here, Mr. Caribbean man. This is not really your space, but we get a chance. So, but in Africa, you are treated as if you belong, and that's the difference. And that means you are not excluded from opportunity for wealth creation, from impact generation, and then, of course, for just enjoying the fruits of your labor.
So, with your experience in NetCo, financial freedom has always been one of the important facts of life that you pursue. And I remember when you were giving a presentation, you spoke about your experience opening your own newsletter, right? The magazine.
Yes.
Right? And
that nobody would have wanted to purchase, but I didn't think it through to the end. I was thinking this is a very important thing. I'll document culture and so on, but I didn't think about the consumer.
Right. So we're going to zoom right into that point and take from that an experience for most entrepreneurs. What would you tell that young person who has an idea, has no resources, don't know where to go, doesn't have a mentor? What are the immediate steps that that person should take?
The easiest business to do is what somebody else is already doing. Of course, better returns come when you are the first, or you have a nuance to something that people can't imitate. So the best business to be in is in a monopoly. And I'll give an example of a simple monopoly. There are many coffee houses in the country, many, but nobody is serving up Ethiopian style coffee. Ethiopia is the birthplace of coffee. Nobody is serving up that. Now, is there a market for that? You put a capital at risk and find out. It costs $1 million to open a coffee house. But in terms of the equipment and the space, you can't rent it in the back of somewhere and that kind of thing. But if, of course, you decide to say, let me just open up a copycat Starbucks, a copycat Rituals, you will make money, all right, because it's a simple model. So if you do, but then what you do to get a monopoly, you go to a location that is not really serviced. So you go to Point 14 on the beach. There's a Rituals in the heart of the town, but there's none on the beach. So somebody reaches down on the beach, there's nowhere to go. You may just need to cover your seats because people get wet and sandy. But I'm just giving that as a joke, but as a serious one in that. And so the key thing with a business is you have to be able to exploit your lead position and make enough revenue to protect you against competition. So if you are, and you need to stay in it long enough, you need to be able to see that you can stay in it long enough. Now, the other issue is you don't want to use all your resources to the point where you know there's no way to move forward in our market. In other markets where there's access to capital, that's another issue. All right? You could get capital. But in our market, you have to preserve your resources because the moment you can't pay rent, your business ends. If your business depends on a brick and mortar location. And therefore, what I would advise somebody to do is do a rent and expenses test. So for my business in Togo, by force, I did the test. You have to pay 6 months rent up front, 6 to 8 months rent up front. So I would have paid that. You have to have fund money for salaries. So therefore, you have at least a year's expenses, 60 months a year's expenses, so that you can cover the bases, the basic part of the business. Now, people will say, well, most people will never reach there, which is true. Then maybe you need to conceive of a business idea that with whatever little funds you have, it can go for 6 to 8 months without any disruption. At least a year even, without disruption. So if you don't have cash, find a business idea that does not require cash. So a simple idea I had was, I know a lot of entrepreneurs, I'll do a business market. So I did one, and they pay me, I rent the location. So I didn't have any money. In fact, I lost my job. That was 2017. I was unemployed partially because I was still lecturing part-time as an adjunct lecturer at a tertiary level institution. But I was in a consultancy, and the consultancy came to an end. And therefore, I had to do something else to generate revenue. So that's what I did. I said, okay, I was doing consultancy for businesses, so let me just get a location and I will start to, I rented UE, JFK Auditorium.
Right.
Then I did Promenade. So I did different locations. And that generated some revenue for me. But I did that with $0. You understand? So if you don't have cash, you have to be creative. And you have to be able to do a business that allows you to get there. If you have cash and you have time, then conceive of a business that will be worth your while. Invest properly, heavily even, but test it. So I shipped some goods over to Africa, and the price point is okay, it's on the high end, but it requires me now to sit back and work the market, explain the product to the customer. I couldn't have done that business if I didn't have the ability to earn while the business grows. If I had to leave my job and go into the business will collapse. You have to trust people. If you're somebody who can't trust people, forget business. Do everything yourself. Be a one-man army or one-woman army, but you're not going to be working for you. I have people who come to work for me, and I can't see them. I have to trust what they tell me is true. So I have to put mechanisms in place. But putting cameras is not really going to help you against unethical employees. So you have to figure out someone's ethics. And I go with the red flag rule. If I can't trust you with little things, I'm not going to go further. So but I give somebody a chance, but if it's something that speaks to the person's ethics.
Yes, and character.
Yeah, the character.
Yes.
For example, an employee, she will come and there's nothing to do. It was just packing stock and waiting because I was building stock to ship to Trinidad. And then I told her, well, give us some work to do and just go and check the supermarket's price point and that kind of thing. Good. I printed the label saying Trinidad, I'll bring it up when I come. So then I told her, well, okay, I have something for you to do. And she was like, I can't do anything. A customer is in the store. I keep calling back. She said, well, the customer was in the store for 4 hours. And then I told her, I say, how do we have customers? We don't have customers, right? Because we don't have a product to sell. We're not selling from our store. She said, well, yeah, you got me there. So that's somebody. No, I had a camera on her. Because I camera to protect the goods and to protect the road. But I didn't tell her that. Right? Because she could see the camera. The camera is physically in the store. So it also means the person was not too wise. But what I explained to her, I say, if you're working somewhere, you have to have good character. We don't have customers. How could a customer be attracting your time?
For 4 hours.
For 4 hours. We don't have customers. Because we're not selling the product. We're just packing the product. So that's a red flag. Somebody like that, if you have a supervisor, you have to tell your supervisor, okay, you need to manage this behavior. Right? And those are the things, but you can't have that person be managing your business. That person can be an employee, but they can't be a manager. So what I've learned to do is to trust people once they give me a reason to do so. And that's all. That is my only criteria. Once you give me a reason to trust you, I'll trust you. And I find my employees are working good. In fact, I've given them money that would be equivalent to more than a year's salary when I was bringing the goods, right? Yeah, bringing the goods in the US, so, and not a cent was missing. Not a cent. They didn't even buy a sweetie. So I was like, no, these are good people, right? So the key thing is getting good people, because equivalently, you can get a bad person and business could collapse. So when you get good people, you treat them well, give them good training. You give them the things that you would want if you're working for a company, which is you want access to credit to purchase your own home. You want a salary that allows you to be able to purchase your own home in the market that you're in. So you don't need to pay me like if I'm in America, but you need to pay me where I'm living, I can purchase a home. So those are the things I've learned so far, and I intend to remain doing business, because why I set up that business is to be a bridge between Africa and the Caribbean. So I ship goods to Africa, and I'm going to start manufacturing stuff as well and distribute to other markets using some of the feedstock from here, from Transatlantic.
Nice. So, Taharqa, as we are beginning to wind down, there's a segment we call Rapid Blue, where I'm going to ask you some questions, and the first thing that pops in your head, that's the answer that we want to get, right? So, what's one book that changed your life's perspective?
One book that changed my life's perspective?
Yes.
I had to say Ivan Van Sertima, They Came Before Columbus.
Okay.
Which basically speaks about Africans who left Mali, Songhai Empire, and Africans who left Africa before Columbus, and that's how they could have shown him the way to reach here.
Right. Favorite place in Trinidad and Tobago?
Pirates Bay, Charlottesville, Tobago.
One habit that keeps you productive?
Exercise, daily, regularly. Morning when I wake up, evening before I sleep.
What's your favorite holiday or cultural celebration for Trinidad and Tobago?
That's kind of hard. We have two. I have Emancipation and Carnival.
Right. And let me get your perspective. You would have gone to Africa. What is one cultural tradition that you deeply admire across there?
The respect for the head of the family, the place that the head of the family has in his society. And everybody belongs to a family. So therefore, everybody has rights equally. So even if somebody is a pauper, if you have a problem with them, you take their land, like a powerful man comes and takes someone's land. Here in Trinidad, is you to catch with a powerful man, because we have inherited the Western society. Although to an extent, if you go to the countryside, the family members will let them know, hey, this person has family, I'll be careful. But by and large, we still have this 1v1 thing. But when you go there to Africa, you try to take that person's land because they're not financially strong, they're not powerful. They can go to the head of the family who will be powerful in the context of the community, and they could humble that person. So the concept of the head of the family and their role in society.
Interesting.
And the family might be 500 people, not a nuclear family.
Like, yeah. Okay. So, Taharqa, if my listeners want to get in contact with you, how do they do that?
Well, Taharqa Obika is there's only one Taharqa Obika on social media, so they can search my name and they can direct message me on Facebook, or they can send me a message on WhatsApp 7496922.
Nice. Thank you very much. So, listeners of the Blueprint podcast, you would have heard the insightful conversation that we would have just had with Taharqa Obika. You would have gained some history lesson in the context of Trinidad and Tobago. We would have explored our roots in the continent of Africa and also would have explored the conversation about economic development and financial freedom. Taharqa carried us through from year to year, from perspective to perspective, and from point of view, teaching us life lessons as to how we can improve as an individual, as how we can improve as a community and as a society in the global context. So, as we are accustomed having it on the Blueprint podcast, we have true and honest conversations where we learn from each other in building a better country together. So, continue to email us, recommend who you think should be our next guest on the podcast. Follow us on all our social media feeds, like, share, and let us continue this movement and experience together. Thank you. Thank you, Taharqa.
Thank you. Dr. Reed.
Yes.